Look, it's great to be here tonight with such a large crowd. And my task is to talk about how we might be affected by the carbon price mechanism that's coming in, and then what we can do about that. Before I go through my slides, I just want to flag that I've said to the organisers that they're welcome to put my slides on their website, and the website is on the back at the bottom of this little leaflety thing. So it's just that some of the stuff's a bit fine printy, so if you really want to look at the detail, you might want to look at the actual slides. My initial slide is actually from the original review by Ross Garnaut, showing the kind of emission trajectory that Australia and other countries would have to follow if we were to achieve a globally fair response that led to no more than a 2-degree warming in the Earth's temperature. And so what you can see is Australia's right up the top in per capita emissions, and we really do have to make enormous cuts in our emissions. So Australia really, in terms of simple global equity, has to make a big effort in this area. But more importantly, failing to act on pricing carbon and taking the other actions that Anna's talked about will actually extend the period of uncertainty that our electricity industry and many other industries already face. And so therefore we are more likely to have power blackouts if we do not introduce a carbon price. So it's all very well for people to scaremonger and make outrageous misleading claims, but the reality is the sooner we get a carbon price in, the sooner we'll all get on with the new paradigm, and surprisingly the world will not end, and in fact if we're smart we'll do really well. And I guess that's what a lot of my talk tonight is. Okay, so I do actually want to address some of the myths that have been being spread around. I find it, I mean, I spoke to a group from the University of Third Age the other week, and a lot of those people were just terrified about what the cost impacts on their lives would be from this carbon price. Now, the answer is that they will not suffer, but they were so frightened by all the things they read and seen in the media that I was just appalled that people could actually do such things to people by frightening them the way they are. So let's just look at a few things. First of all, it's not a great big tax. There's about 500 companies are going to have a compliance issue, and none of us have to do anything. There will be no working out your carbon footprint unless you want to. There will be no tax returns. There will be no extra GST forms or anything. This is not something we have to get into at all. So I've spoken with people from business who are terrified about how hard it will be to work out their carbon footprints. And it's like, oh, why do you want to do that? Oh, because that's going to be the new law. No. I said that right. There won't be any carbon police looking over the shoulders of small businesses or households. Yes, there will be laws that the big 500 emitters have to comply with, but they've got to comply with lots of laws already, and there are already some pretty big fines that they can be hit with. So this is not new for them, and they are big enough to look after themselves. And in fact, they're already reporting their greenhouse gas emissions under a mechanism set up under the Howard government. The cost we will see are what we call pass-through costs, in the sense that the big emitters who do have to pay for their pollution will attempt to pass through to their customers some of the costs of their carbon obligations. We'll talk about that a bit more. The reality is they're mostly very small, most people will be compensated, and in fact pretty much everyone will be able to take action which will avoid the costs. So a lot of us should actually profit quite nicely from the compensation the government's generously giving us. the sorts of things that some of the building industry organisations have talked about, $6,000 price rises on our houses. The best data we can come up with at RMIT is maybe 700 at the most. Food prices will not skyrocket despite what the Food and Grocery Council say. There is no evidence to back up their report, and if you read Lenore Taylor's article a couple of weeks ago in The Age, you'll find that when she contacted them, they were not able to provide much evidence at all to support their view. And this is one of our problems in the media at the moment, is that it seems that anyone can make any outrageous claim that attacks a carbon price and it'll be published without scrutiny. It's just remarkable. Okay, now this is one of the fine print slides. You don't have to read the detail on this. I just wanted to show you that it is, I have sourced what I'm about to say from an Australian Energy Markets Commission report to COAG, the Council of Australian Governments. Over the next 3 years, Victoria, which is that column, will experience, according to the energy people, about a 27% increase in electricity prices, as Anna said. And this is without a carbon price. What's interesting is that 60% of that increase will be due to energy retailers charging us for the privilege of being harangued by door-to-door and phone salesmen trying to get us to change retailers. That cost will be more than the carbon cost on our electricity. So let's get it straight. We are paying more for the privilege of a badly designed energy market than we will be paying for a carbon price on our electricity.
And for the new meters?
Well, that's on top of it. Let's not get into that. So I think this is really important to put this in context. There are lots of changes going on in our society, and when you put them into a context, the carbon price is a pretty small thing. And really, its aim is to make polluters to pay, and we have been talking about doing this at senior policy levels for 20 years. Right? This has been seriously on the table for 20 years. And the real question is, why has it taken so long? And the answer is very powerful vested interest groups. Right, now again, if we look at the economic impact on us, the left-hand slide here just shows this is what would happen to Australia's emissions if we do nothing. And these are the various scenarios that Ross Garnaut analysed in his study. One of them is pretty close to, the highest one is pretty close to what the government's proposing. Now then, what's interesting, this is the, if you like, the economic activity, the gross national product per person between 2010 and 2050. And you can see under a carbon price, we will be slightly less wealthy than we would have otherwise been. Now, as Anna pointed out, ClimateWorks have just released a study today, which I would agree with, which says that Treasury has actually underestimated the amount of savings in emissions we'll achieve. So the reality is that gap there is likely to be smaller. So the reality is, especially if we actually consider the benefits of reduced climate change as a result of successful global response, then in fact we're very unlikely to see much difference in our economic wealth over the next 40 years under an emission abatement strategy. And in fact, what's interesting to me is that the very strong emission reduction strategies, up to 15%, Garnaut 25% reduction by, actually don't cost us very much more than doing what we're doing. So my question to the government is, why aren't we going for a 25% cut by 2020? Yes, I know that there'd be some hysterical reaction to that, but there you go.
Hysterical reaction now.
Right, so I think it's important to ask, why is the economic impact of these enormous taxes so small? Well, keep in mind, most of the focus of the emissions trading scheme is actually on energy, on fossil fuel energy. And energy is actually quite a small part of our economy. Your average services business, about half of its expenses, 0.5% of its expenses are energy. So you can see double the price of energy and wow, their expenses have gone up by 0.5%. That's the kind of issue that we face. So over the whole economy, it's about 5 or 6%, not much. Second, the money that is raised from a carbon pricing mechanism is not lost to the economy. The government feeds it back into the economy. Now, Anna's explained the various ways. Half of it's going to go to households and so on. So this money is not lost. It's going round and round the economy. And in fact, if it's spent well, it could actually grow the economy more than the visible costs of carbon pricing. Also, the whole idea of a carbon price and the other measures is to shift us towards lower greenhouse impact fuels and cost-effective energy efficiency measures and a whole bunch of things like that, which do indeed offer the potential to cut costs and create more jobs. For example, we know that if you invest a given amount of money in energy efficiency or renewable energy, you will create more jobs on average than if you spent that same amount of money in the conventional energy sector, simply because energy efficiency and renewables are services and light manufacturing type activities that employ quite a few people per dollar, whereas the energy sector does not employ many people at all per dollar of investment. The winners, that is the people who actually start helping us to cut our emissions and cut their emissions themselves, will get more demand for the products and the services they offer. This is why 2 of our 4 major banks have gone carbon neutral, voluntarily and at a profit. There are some losers, but the losers are actually less than 10% of our economy. You wouldn't realise that from the advertising campaigns, would you? But they are quite small. They are just very loud and very well organised. And again, the key thing is that if our policy is smart, we can increase the benefits and cut the costs of carbon strategies. So, and I'll show you a bit about that with this next slide. Economists expect the price of carbon to progressively increase over time as the targets get tighter and tighter, and it's harder to find more abatement. This is a big study by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in one of the reports no one talks about, showing that if we actually drive innovation harder, investing in innovation, we can drop the carbon price very substantially. Okay, so we are not passive victims in this game. If we respond creatively and constructively, we cut the cost of carbon. More importantly, what you've got to keep in mind is that this is not an increase in our total carbon cost. This is the increase in the cost per tonne of carbon. So if I cut my emissions by the 80% the government's aiming for by 2050, then if the carbon price increased by a factor of 5, I would be paying no more in terms of total carbon cost, because my emissions would be 1/5, my carbon price would be 5 times, 5 times 1/5 equals 1. That is, my total carbon cost would be the same. Now, what's going to be the impacts on a number of things that are in our everyday lives? Well, the biggest and most visible factor will be our electricity and gas bills. Now, we need to keep in mind that the government's estimated that on average this will be about $5 a week, so it's not enormous. But the way it works is that, first of all, how many of you are buying green power? Okay, the good news is green power doesn't generate any greenhouse gas. So the green power providers will not have to buy permits. So you can sit back relaxed. And in fact, the good news will be that as the price of ordinary electricity goes up, as the carbon price goes up, eventually we get to a point where ordinary coal-fired electricity will be more expensive than renewables. And given that we are seeing the renewables going down in cost, that will be sooner than many of us realise. So we have room to move, okay? These things will change. There will be price increases if you sit and do nothing and keep buying coal-fired power. But the fact is, the electricity industry, once it has the certainty of a carbon price, will invest in low-emission technologies and will not invest in new coal-fired power stations. So it's up to us to give them that signal. Okay, now the other dimension, so energy is the obvious one. The other factor is that because fossil fuel energy is used to produce our food, our cars, all sorts of things like that, we will see a small carbon cost added to all of the goods and services that we buy unless the providers get smart and cut their emissions. But so what might that look like? Well, this is a study that was done for the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, so this is not a government study. And what it shows is if you applied a $25 a tonne carbon price and suppliers did nothing to cut their emissions, and you didn't take into account the free permits they're all getting, which will reduce the cost, then the sorts of impacts that this economic group looked at were health services 0.3%. Well, I don't know that I'd noticed that on my Medibank bill. Food and bakery products 1%. So these are the kinds of prices. If you buy something greenhouse intensive, you're looking at 3.7%. The average, 1.6%. Now, Treasury said we'll see on average a 0.7% increase. The reason for the difference is really that Treasury's taken into account all of these, the compensation and the fact that petrol's not included and a few things like that. I have to speak up. Again, in individual products, you need to realise that even now there are big differences. If you buy the most efficiently made bricks in Melbourne, they've got a third of the greenhouse cost of the least efficiently produced bricks. Okay, we will see a bit of price differential and people will tend towards the cheaper bricks that have lower emission. So what we need to do is choose low emission suppliers of everything. Just to show you changes already happening, this is the, in the last 18 months, Australians have purchased 600 megawatts of photovoltaics, which is more than one Loy Yang power unit. And the economics are looking good. If you're looking at energy efficiency, what we see is that if we, and this is a study we did for the social welfare movement, if we invest in energy efficient appliances, pay the extra cost off over time, and pay a carbon price, our total cost will still be less than the average electricity bill today without a carbon price, and we will be insulated to some extent from the ongoing increases in the electricity industry. So there's a nice story here. Again, rapid change. 2 years ago, big flat screen TVs were energy guzzling disasters, and we used to say, don't buy one. The best ones today are using half as much energy as a normal older TV. Phenomenal improvement. Now, what can you do about it? I'm nearly there. One good thing is to take a sheet of paper and just think about what are all the things you might be doing over the next 5 years. Buying a new fridge in 1 year, changing your car, renovating, whatever. Because these are the opportunities you will have to cut your emissions at least cost and most convenience. And then you can have a trajectory to cut your emissions and your carbon costs. Lastly, if you want some help, if you go into the EPA website, there is now a free calculator which you can work out your carbon footprint and explore a whole lot of opportunities that you might be able to take up. And this is, I was in Copenhagen, this is the Netherlands. The Netherlands have a lottery where the proceeds go to the environment, and they use the proceeds to fund the development of a very efficient LED lamp Then they used more of the proceeds to buy 2.5 million of them to give to their lottery players. And that 2.5 million funded the tooling up for local production of a world-leading energy-efficient lamp. So there's lots of great ways we can make a difference. Thank you.